I was in catechism one day at church. You know, on Saturday we'd go to catechism, and every Friday at our church, they had a hall, you know, with a stage, and Father says, look at, you know, we're always, on Fridays when we had dances, we're always dancing to records, you know, Victrola. But he says, I'd like to start a live band to play for dancing on Friday. He says, I play piano, you all know that. He says, so who in the room here plays an instrument? So my dear friend Amo Richards, he was there at catechism, and he raised his hand and he said, Father, I play xylophone. Father says, that's incredible. I raised my hand and said, Father, I'm a drummer, but I just play field drum. I don't own a drum set. He said, well, then we need to put together a drum set. So I said, well, I don't have, you know, my folks, we can't afford one. He said, well, I'll take you to a used music store and we'll put something together. So I told him about the drum corps, you know, the Scotch bass drum and field drum. And my father had a real great metal, he was a, you know, snare drum player. He had a great Ludwig snare drum. So we used the Scotch bass drum from the drum corps, and I told Father we need to buy spurs so the bass drum wouldn't, you know, go forward or turn sideways. And we went and found some used spurs, and I put a field drum from the drum corps. We got a long rod, screwdriver, and we put it between the rods of the field drum and the bass drum, and that was my tom-tom. So we bought a snare drum stand for the snare drum, and of course no stool and no hi-hats in those days. And we used a, you know, band cymbal from the drum corps, and then we used another field drum for the drum corps for a field drum, and that was my drum set. That's how I got started. Then when I got to be about 17 years old, 16, 17, I joined the union. You know, and I was 16. I was exactly 16 at the time. And I needed to have a sponsor. And I have been doing some casuals, what we call casuals, you know, weekend gigs, with a guitar player, Joe Mace. And the leader of the band was Tiny Quinn, an alto sax player. So I started working with them. You know, I had to go to the union. Joe Mace had to be there to sponsor me. And one of my first gigs was playing for an all-gay revue, 5 nights a week. And that's how I got started. You know, from there I started working, you know, when I got a little bit older, 17, I started working for one of the busy casual band leaders in town, playing at country clubs. I was in a rehearsal band, big band, with some of the guys I, you know, played with in high school. We went down south. Some of the members of the band were graduates of the Schillinger House, which is today the Berkeley School of Music. We went down south and played for a whole summer. And things like that started to happen. When I got back, I was about, you know, a couple of years later, after I got back, I auditioned for the Hartford Symphony Orchestra because my teacher was a member and he asked me to go and audition for it. He thought I was ready for it. I auditioned for the Hartford Symphony and I got the first percussion chair. When I was about 23 years old, I got married. I met my wife and got married, and at that time, I was doing casuals. I was in the Hartford Symphony, and I did some Broadway shows that were coming in, you know, into Hartford. And then the contractor for the casual bands that I was working for, he contracted and premiered, was involved in premiering the Broadway show Man of La Mancha. And I did that, and did that for a whole summer. And during a matinee, I kind of, you know, after a few months of doing that, I kind of got into a stage of my life where I wasn't happy musically. And at that time, I was doing, you know, I was establishing a a reputation as a jazz drummer and teacher also. So all this was coming together. But then I was playing with Donald Byrd one night, trumpet player at a club in Hartford, and it happened that Amo Richards, my friend, that I told you about earlier, we met when we were very young, when we were 10 years old. He came back. He was out in Hollywood, already established as a studio musician, and he came that night to see Donald Byrd, and he was surprised that I was there playing drums. Anyways, we got talking, and he thought that I should come out and visit him in California, and I was kind of getting bored doing, Broadway shows and the same music over and over. So during a matinee one day, I went to the phone booth and called him in California and asked him if I could take him up on his, offer to come to California. So I came out and visited Amo, spent a week with him, and he took me around the studios, And after the week was over, he said, "What do you think?" I says, "Amo, I think I'm cut out. I've had a lot of experience. I think I can make it here." So I came home, told my wife, "Give me a year, and I want to work on my mallet playing," and we went out to California. So I put my wife and 4 kids in the station wagon and hired a trucking company to take some of my instruments and furniture to California. And we came out to California, and I found a house to rent in Burbank, and went. First thing I did was go down to the Musicians Union and join the union. And I had to go, every Monday to sign in for 6 months before I could get my union card. Well, things started happening right away. I went to the Musicians Union and they had rehearsal halls. So I went down and checked some of the rehearsal bands that were rehearsing, and I went up to drummers, introduced myself, told them if you ever can't make a rehearsal, I play jazz. I'm a jazz drummer, and my aspirations were to, I'm a percussionist also. I play timpani and mallets and all that. So before you know it, Chuck Flory's a great drummer that used to play with Woody Herman. He was rehearsing one day, and I, went up to him and introduced myself and told him my story. And he says, "Man," he says, "I'm always using drummers to rehearse for me." He says, "So you're going to hear from me." And the very next week, I heard from him and went to the union and rehearsed with a great big band. And, the guys in the band, the trumpet player came over to me, his sax player came over and said, "I like the way you play. I'm going to recommend you to these other bands I play in." And before you know it, I subbed for a vibe player one night at SC, and it was for a composition that was written by Bill Kraft, the timpanist with the LA Philharmonic. And I did that rehearsal, and comes to find out that the Bill Kraft got very upset that he sent me without telling, him, Bill, that he was sending a sub. So I did the rehearsal, and after the rehearsal, Bill Kraft came over to me and said, "I want you to do the concert." And he says, "By the way, you have to play the La Noce for Stravinsky, and Pierre Boulez from France is coming to conduct it. And Stravinsky's going to be there at the rehearsal and concert." So that was my biggest break, because on the program, they print the names of the people in the orchestra. And we did a couple of pieces of Boulez's, and we did La Noce by Stravinsky. And I did the, snare drum part, field drum part in La Noce, and so on. And before you know it, Bill Kraft, the timpanist with the LA Philharmonic, was happy with what I did. So he started hiring me at the Hollywood Bowl to play with the LA Philharmonic. And music contractors in the movie industry, they go to these concerts. And this one big contractor, Bobby Helfer, was at the Bowl one night, and he saw my name on the program. And Mike Lang, this piano player named Mike Lang, was getting married, and he invited my wife and I to his wedding. And on the way out, we were leaving the ballroom, and this Bobby Helfer, this big contractor, happened to be walking by because he was a friend of Mike Lang's, this piano player. So Mike asked him to come over and wanted to introduce him to me. And he introduced him to me, and he says, "Oh, I saw your name on the program at the Hollywood Bowl." And he says, "By the way, you worked at Shelley's Manhole, right?" I says, "Yeah, I worked there with Chet Baker, this great jazz trumpet player, in my early days when I went to L.A., because I knew the piano player was blind, Dave Mackay, a friend of mine, and he got me on the gig." Well, anyways, Bobby Helfer said, "Shelley Man recommended you because he heard you play." He says, "So you're going to hear from me." And that was my biggest break, because he was the biggest contractor in town, especially at Universal Pictures. So, after that happened, and in the meantime, I was playing at, jazz clubs around town, but before you know it, my name started getting around town with the other movie contractors. And there was a contractor at Paramount Studios, and my name came up to him, and it wasn't to do studio work, it was to play with the Glendale Symphony Orchestra. And I did, some concerts with them and played the Hollywood Bowl with that orchestra also. Well, he found out, that I, was playing with the Glendale Symphony, and he got a good report from the conductor. So he started calling me for studio work at Paramount Studios. And that was for major movies, but there was another contractor there that did the TV film, like Mission Impossible. So I started getting calls for that, and that's where I met Lalo Schifrin. And I played percussion and drums on Mission Impossible. And then, from there, my name started getting around as a percussionist who could play drums, because what they contractors really liked was a percussionist who could play drums, or a drummer, vice versa, that could play percussion, because when they would do the first show of the season for a TV film show, they would hire a big orchestra. But after that, the weeks after that, the orchestra went from 65, 75 musicians, and went down to about 28 musicians. So they had to cut down on all the sections of the orchestra. So in the percussion section, they just wanted one guy there that could play drums and percussion. So before you know it, I started getting all these calls to work out at Fox, Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers. That's how it all started. I did all those TV shows, and then I even did live TV. I did Peggy Lee, I did Bobby Darin, I did Glenn Campbell, I did the Smothers Brothers. Everything started going through the roof from then on. And I have a lot of great memories about those days. Unfortunately, not to speak against electronics, because they're great in their place, But back in that day, we were working, I would leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning and do double and triple sessions, movies, TV, film, recordings, jingles. Everything was happening, And there were, everybody was working. There were no electronics to get in the way. There were no drum machines, And it was just a great camaraderie, Everybody was working, and nobody was stepping on anybody's toes, It was just a great scene, and, jazz clubs all over the place. It was just a great place to be musically. And then, of course, the business started changing. You know, electronics started coming in onto the scene, and they started cutting back on musicians and using more electronics, and eventually it became totally electronic. And you know, a lot of music left LA too, you know, because of budget. You know, a lot of movie people, production companies were going to Czechoslovakia, London, and so on to do, you know, movie scores, or they would go to Canada, and the same thing happened with TV film. A lot of musicians actually moved from LA. They went to Salt Lake City and places like that because, you know, they kind of took over the recording business as far as TV film. But there is still a big amount of movie scores going on in town, but it's kind of cliquish, more cliquish than it was back in the day. So, but if you're in that clique, you get an awful lot of work and an awful lot of money. So back in the in late 60s and very early 70s, my son Jeffrey started developing a reputation. What happened was I was working for a music contractor, Jules Chaikin, doing, you know, Broadway shows for him. I did the Russian circus when it came to town and things like that. Anyways, he took his son to a Halloween party in our neighborhood. We lived in the same neighborhood as this music contractor. And he took his son to the, you know, local park where the kids used to hang. And it was Halloween night, and Jeff had some friends like David Page and Steve Lukather. I introduced Jeff when I was doing the Glenn Campbell show. I brought him along with me, and he met David Page. Anyways, they were playing this Halloween party, and this music contractor went to it, and he freaked over the band. It was really burning, and you know, the kids were dancing, and everybody was having a ball. So I get a phone call the next morning, and from Jules Chaikin, he says, "Why didn't you tell me you had a son that played drums the way he does?" I says, "I don't, you know, go around bragging about my son, you know, because when he gets 18 or 19, it's a whole different scene. You know, I've heard drummers, when they're very young, they play great, but all of a sudden, when they get, you know, to that age, 20, 21, they're not little kids anymore, and then their playing is, you know, not what you thought you heard back when they were 16. So I knew about that being a drum teacher. I saw that happen, you know. So I never bragged. He says, "Well, you know, Jack Doherty, who had he used to produce the Carpenters, you know, and he had a rehearsal band every Saturday at Herb Alpert's recording studio, you know, and he says, I'm going to bring your son there because Hal Blaine, famous drummer that was doing all the dates, he says he usually does it, but he gets hung up a lot on record dates. And I want to introduce your son to Jack Doherty." So Jeff went, and he met Jim Keltner there. And they both played double drums on a tune for Jack Doherty. And the band was made up of all these incredible studio players. So, you know, the next week, when they went to work talking to contractors, they said, "God, you got to hear Joe Porcaro's son, Jeffrey. You know, he's played with us and recorded with us with Jack Doherty's band, and you got to check him out." So before you know it, these music contractors were hiring Jeff, you know, to do dates, even TV film. And at the same time, you know, Jeffrey had met David Page, and one thing led to another, and they met Dave Hungate, the bass player that was originally, you know, with Toto, and they got Jeff on the Sonny and Cher group, you know, band. He started playing for Sonny and Cher. He did their TV show, you know, and before you know it, Hungate moved to Nashville, so Mike took over on bass, and meanwhile, Steve became one of the keyboard players when they formed the Toto band. He did a lot of electronics and did a lot of the writing for the band in the early days. And then they brought Mike on, and that became the rhythm section for Toto. And Mike and Jeff started really getting into a groove, and before you know it, Jeff, put himself on the spot because he started recommending, Mike to, producers and contractors on record sessions, And that kind of, that was hard for Jeff to do because he had some bass player friends that he, had worked with, but he felt good playing with his brother, so he tried to help him out a little bit. Not totally, but he helped him out, to get his foot in the door. While I was doing studio work, some of the studio, because of Jeff, some of the studio musicians wanted me to teach their sons, So I started, doing a few, taking on a few students. And, friends of Jeff would come by the house and I'd be teaching a student and they wanted to play drums too. So, I had quite a few students that came to me because of Jeff, But in the studios, like I said, I was teaching some of the musicians, their sons, and even John Williams, the famous, composer. I taught his son Mark, and actually that whole family. John Williams has two brothers, and his dad. They were all drummers and percussionists, and incredible too. But John had a niece who's I taught her, and she was one of my best students as far as talent and timekeeping. She was incredible. But one of the musicians, and he was part of the Wrecking Crew, Tommy Tedesco, this guitar player, and Howard Roberts. I did a lot of out at Universal. I did a lot of sessions with them, and Tommy did, and they both were involved in Musicians Institute. Back in that day, in the early 70s, they called it GIT, Guitar Institute, Bass Institute, BIT. And Tommy and Howard Roberts, these guitar players, they were investors in this school, in MI, Musicians Institute. And they came up to me during a coffee break one day, and they said, look, we want to start a drum school at our school in Hollywood. And we want to call it PIT, Percussion Institute. So you have GIT, BIT, and PIT. So I said, great, no problem. So they said, come on, can we get it going? Can we, so they had the biggest investor was this gentleman, Pat Hicks. And there were the three of them together, and Pat Hicks's wife, Becky. And they called a meeting, and I went and met with them, and they said, this is what we want. We want to, open up a drum school and try to get, rock drummers to come to school here, jazz drummers. And they said, what do you think? So I thought about it, and they said, we'll give you 10% royalty, on the, what it's going to cost them to come to school. So I thought about it, and then I said, well, I don't, I played rock on Mission Impossible and Hawaii Five-0, but I didn't know if I could really get into it teaching-wise. Yeah, I could do something, but odd meters and stuff like that, which I played on Don Ellis's band. I played with Zappa. I did a rehearsal with him. I didn't play any live I did do a concert I did 400 Motels with Zappa, with the LA Philharmonic. I played on that. But, so I thought about it, and I said, I think I'd like to bring in somebody with me. Are you guys okay with that? They said, this is your baby. You could do anything you want. So I went home and I thought about it. Who do I want to bring in with me? Because I'm still busy as all hell doing studio work, and I'm not going to give that up for anybody. And I told them, I says, can I send subs? They said, no problem. So I thought, okay, the guy I want came to mind. That the light went on, and it was Ralph Humphrey. I said, Ralph would be incredible for this, because not only is he a great rock drummer and an odd meter drummer, we played together on the Don Ellis band, but he was just I could tell he was a good educator. So I called Ralph up, and he jumped at it right away, because he wasn't that busy at the time. And I explained to him the situation. So we got together, and then they had an opening back in '83. They called a meeting, and they invited drummers. They advertised in Modern Drummer, and they had a big meeting, and we had about 15 prospective students came, and we opened up PIT that fall. So that was an incredible experience for me, teaching-wise, because what it did for me also was, putting together a curriculum, which, we had a jazz course, we had a technique course, we had a sight reading course, we had a rock course, we had an odd meter course, and so on. So it, put a whole new perspective for me to, okay, how do I do this? How do we put it together? So Ralph and I got together, and we thought about it, and we came up with a good curriculum, what I thought was tops. And as we went along, we brought in teachers. Of course, we couldn't do it all. So we brought in Joey Barron. We brought in, Joey Barron is, out here at the time was a pretty well-known jazz drummer. But then he went on to move to New York and became developed a great reputation as a jazz drummer. And Joey also got into avant-garde, style of drumming. But anyways, we built our staff. And the whole thing about teaching at PIT was seeing a student come in there and could hardly play a note of jazz or rock or whatever, and then go on after a year and a half and become a pretty good little drummer when he left. So it just was a great feeling to see that happen. And we developed, Kurt Pescara came out of our school, Taka Numazawa, a wonderful rock drummer in Tokyo, came out of our school. There's a few more, I can't think of their names right now, but we had quite a few students that came out of MI. Jeff used to come and do clinics there, He would bring, Abe Laborio with him, and, Greg, I can't think of his last name now down at, great organ player, keyboard player. And they used to come, and the kids used to freak out. They put on a little concert. So it's a great, again, a great little niche there for me for quite a few years. And then we eventually left and went to Pasadena and opened up Lama. So when we were at Musicians Institute, PIT, Japanese people came in and took over the school. And what happened was they were going to go in a different direction, and we decided to leave the school. So we had a student at PIT from Germany, and he always wanted to open up his vision. He wanted to open up his own type of drum schools in LA. He called them modern drum schools. So he found an investor that wanted to invest with him, and he opened up a school in Pasadena called Los Angeles Music Academy. And when he found out that Ralph and I were leaving PIT, Musicians Institute, he called me up and asked if we would come with him and help him build a music school over in Pasadena. And I said, well, let me talk to Ralph Humphrey and see what we could put together. And I called Ralph and he loved the idea. So we opened up LA Music Academy in Pasadena that following year. And we've been going, now we're called LA College of Music. The school has been growing and growing and growing. And we're on our way. We're an actual college of music now. As far as the jazz scene, that's happening here in LA. It's not like it used to be. You know, back in the day, we had Shelley's Manhole. We had Howard Rumsey at the Lighthouse Inn. We had Dante's. We had all kinds of PJs on Santa Monica Boulevard, and there were a few other, clubs. I can't remember their names right now, but that's changed. There's only, as far as I'm concerned, like today, there's Herb Alpert has a jazz club called Vibrato, which is really, really nice. 7 days a week. And then we have the Mambo Cafe. It sounds like Latin, but they do feature jazz there also. And then there's another great jazz club called Catalina's, and they bring in big names. You know, the clubs I just mentioned here in town, they're just local jazz groups, which are great. There's some great musicians in LA today, but there's nowhere to play, and there's no money. There's nothing happening as far as, making a living. Forget it. But Catalina's brings in, big groups, even local, some of the local great players. But it's not, again, just like the music business and the movie industry and TV film industry, the jazz industry today in LA is not so good. It's not what it used to be. And, we're kind of missing guys that were leaders in it, like Shelly Manne, all those great players that were around town. They're not here anymore. They are, but they're not making a living. You can't make a living in jazz in LA. I'll give you a great example. Phil Woods, this incredible jazz saxophone player, came to LA. He moved to LA, and he was playing we had a jazz club called Dante's. And Phil Woods, who is, has an incredible reputation in the jazz industry, he played at this jazz club called Dante's. And he would come out and spend like a month. And I would see him on some studio calls, like at Universal, because he's a wonderful clarinet player. And I'd see him on some sessions. Then I go to Dante's that night. He'd say, I'm playing at Dante's tonight. Come on by, because he's from Springfield, Mass, and I'm from Hartford. We used to see each other now and then and play, sit in and jam. Anyways, you go to Dante's, this wonderful jazz club, and there'd be maybe 15 people in the audience. Phil Woods, can you imagine? And then you go to New York, and you go to Birdland, and the place is packed. Packed. So it's really weird. LA is really not a jazz town, unless, there might be clubs I don't know about, I don't know.
Great.
So in closing, all I have to say is the most satisfying accomplishment that's ever happened to me was bringing my family to LA and me becoming a dream, a studio musician, developed, I guess, a reputation, and doing what I'm doing today. I'm teaching jazz at Los Angeles College of Music, and for a guy who never had a high school diploma, and grew up, in the rough years, part of the Depression, and had no schooling, no direction, just love from my mother and father and brothers and everybody, and always encouragement. And I can't ask for anything more. I'm in a retirement home. What more can I ask for? And I'm still playing jazz. I'm still, recording. I still even get studio calls. I turn them down. They say, "What? Come on, you could do," I got called a couple of months ago to do The Simpsons. I said, "No, I don't, I'm retired." "Oh, come on, Joe, Alf Clausen is the composer for it." And I used to rehearse in his, every Saturday. He had a rehearsal band back in the late 60s, and I used to rehearse with him every Saturday. And then now he became a great composer. He's been doing The Simpsons for years, And I got a call. He calls me every once in a while to do it.